You've just brought home fresh pork, but there's no electricity, your fridge isn't working, and you have no freezer. Just you, the meat, and a ticking clock. What now? The Amish have mastered the art of preserving pork for months without modern technology, using techniques like sealing the pork in its own fat. Their methods could save your money, your food, and maybe even your life. Smoking. A lot of Amish families preserve their pork by smoking. This method not only enhances the flavour, but also adds another layer of preservation. Traditional Amish smokehouses are simple yet effective structures, often built from wood and located near the home. Inside, pork is hung from hooks or racks, with a controlled fire burning hardwoods like hickory, oak, or applewood below. The slow smouldering creates a steady stream of smoke that covers the entire meat for several hours or even days, depending on the desired flavour and preservation level. Smoking not only dries the pork further, but also infuses it with a deep, rich aroma that is as much a part of Amish tradition as the preservation itself. There's something incredibly satisfying about the smell of hardwood smoke drifting through the air. It's like time slows down and you're transported to another era. I remember my first experience with a smoker. It wasn't fancy, just a converted barrel, but the pork we made had a flavour so rich and smoky that I couldn't believe it came from our own backyard. It's the kind of taste that stays with you, just like the memories of making it. Smoking serves multiple purposes beyond its ability to preserve pork. It enhances the meat's flavour profile, creating a product that is both functional and delicious. For the Amish, this method is a practical solution to food storage in a world without modern refrigeration. Smoked pork can last for a very long time when stored properly, making it an invaluable resource during the winter months or in times of limited fresh food availability. In addition, the process ties deeply into Amish heritage, with families often passing down specific smoking techniques and recipes across generations. Smoking pork at home might sound intimidating, but it's surprisingly accessible. Start with a smoker or a DIY setup using a grill and a few adjustments. Hardwood chips like hickory, cherry, or applewood are key to achieving that authentic, smoky flavour. Begin by curing the pork as outlined earlier, then place the cuts in the smoker. Maintain a low temperature, ideally around 165 degrees Fahrenheit, and let the pork smoke slowly for several hours. A smaller cut might take 6 to 8 hours, while larger pieces could need 12 to 24 hours. If you don't have a smoker, you can replicate the process by using a charcoal grill with indirect heat and wood chips, ensuring the lid is closed to trap the smoke. The result? Perfectly smoked pork that can be stored for weeks or longer. The smoky aroma and rich flavour make this a classic. But it's not the only way the Amish extend the life of their pork. There's another method that's just as timeless, and it all starts with something as simple as salt. Salt curing. In Amish communities, salt curing is a time-honoured method for preserving pork. This process begins with fresh cuts of pork, which are generously coated with a mixture of salt, sometimes combined with curing salts, like sodium nitrate. The meat is then packed into wooden barrels or stone containers layered with more salt to ensure even curing. This setup is often stored in a cool, dry location, such as a basement or root cellar. Over several weeks, the salt works its magic by drawing out moisture, which inhibits the growth of bacteria and prevents spoilage. The Amish approach this with precision, ensuring the pork is fully cured and safe for long-term storage. Once cured, the meat is either hung in a smokehouse for additional preservation or stored as is. You don't need a homestead or barrels to start salt curing at home. Begin by sourcing fresh pork and coarse kosher salt or a curing salt mix. Rub the salt generously over the pork, ensuring every crevice is covered. Layer the meat and more salt in a non-reactive container such as a plastic bin or glass dish, and store it in a cool, dry area, ideally below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Turn the meat every few days to ensure even curing. After 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the cut size, the pork will be ready for use or further preservation steps, like smoking. This simple method is both cost-effective and an excellent way to build food security. Salt curing isn't just about practicality, it's a reflection of the Amish value of simplicity and self-reliance. Without relying on electricity or refrigeration, this method ensures pork can be stored safely for months, even in warmer climates. In emergencies such as extended power outages, salt-cured meat becomes a lifeline, providing a reliable source of protein. Beyond its utility, the process also imparts a distinct flavour to the pork, enhancing its culinary appeal. For the Amish, salt curing is a sustainable solution that aligns with their commitment to living off the land. There's something almost magical about salt curing. Watching a fresh cut of pork transform into a flavourful, shelf-stable ingredient feels like connecting with history. It reminds me of the first time I tried it at home. The sense of accomplishment was undeniable, and the taste, absolutely worth it. Salt curing is straightforward and effective, but the Amish take their resourcefulness even further by using materials that might surprise you, like wood ash. Ash packing. Ash packing is a technique with deep roots in history, and it remains a practical method for preserving pork in Amish communities. After curing the pork, usually through salting or smoking, it is carefully packed into containers filled with cool, dry wood ash. The ash creates a barrier around the meat, keeping moisture and pests at bay, while maintaining a stable environment that inhibits bacterial growth. Typically, the Amish use ash from hardwoods like oak or hickory, which are known for their clean-burning properties. The pork is often layered with ash to ensure full coverage, and the containers are stored in a dry, ventilated area like a root cellar or barn. Ash packing exemplifies the Amish ability to make use of every available resource. Hardwood ash, often a byproduct of heating and cooking fires, becomes an invaluable tool for preserving food. This method requires no specialized equipment or electricity, making it an ideal solution for off-grid living. In emergencies or long-term food storage scenarios, ash packing provides a low-cost, sustainable way to protect pork while retaining its quality and flavour. Ash packing feels like stepping into a time machine of food preservation. The first time I tried it, I was amazed at how effective such a simple, natural method could be. You can try ash packing at home with a few simple steps. First, ensure the pork is cured or smoked to reduce moisture content. Collect ash from clean, untreated hardwood fires and sift it to remove any large particles. Layer the pork and ash in a food-safe container, making sure the meat is completely covered. Store the container in a dry, cool area to maintain the integrity of the ash barrier. When ready to use, simply brush off the ash, rinse the pork, and prepare it as desired. Who would have thought that ashes from a fire could protect meat for months? But when it comes to creativity, the Amish don't stop there. Let's explore how they combine practicality with a touch of elegance, with wrapping in cloth and wax coating. Wrapping in cloth and wax coating. There's something deeply satisfying about sealing food with your own hands. When I first tried wrapping pork in cloth and wax, I was struck by how elegant the process felt, like crafting a package of preserved history. It's a method that's as rewarding as it is practical. Wrapping cured pork in cloth and coating it with wax is a practical preservation method used by the Amish to extend the shelf life of meat. After the pork is cured or dried, it's wrapped tightly in clean, breathable cloth, usually cotton or muslin. A layer of melted beeswax or paraffin wax is then brushed or dipped over the cloth, creating a seal that protects the meat from moisture, pests, and air exposure. This method is particularly popular for storing hams, as the wax coating helps maintain the pork's flavour and texture over time. To try this at home, start with cured pork. Ham or bacon works especially well. Wrap the meat tightly in clean muslin or cheesecloth, ensuring there are no loose edges. Melt beeswax or paraffin wax in a double boiler and carefully brush or dip the wax onto the wrapped meat until it's fully coated. Allow the wax to harden before storing the pork in a cool, dark place. When you're ready to use the meat, peel away the wax and cloth and prepare the pork as desired. This technique showcases the Amish ability to combine simple materials for maximum efficiency. The cloth provides flexibility and breathability, while the wax adds an extra layer of protection, making the method both durable and sustainable. For long-term storage, especially in situations where modern conveniences like vacuum sealing aren't available, wrapping in cloth and wax offers an effective alternative that's easy to replicate. Wrapping pork in cloth and sealing it with wax keeps it safe and flavourful. But there's another technique that not only preserves the meat, but also transforms it into a rich and ready-to-eat meal through potted meat preservation. Potted meat preservation, crafting pork pies and terrines. The Amish preserve pork by cooking it into rich, flavourful potted meats, such as terrines or pork pies. The process begins by slow cooking pork with fat and seasonings until tender, then packing it tightly into jars or ceramic pots. A thick layer of fat is poured over the top, sealing the meat from air and bacteria. Once the fat solidifies, the pot is stored in a cool, dark place, ready to be enjoyed for weeks or even months. This method is particularly popular for using smaller or less tender cuts, ensuring no part of the pork goes to waste. Potted meat combines practicality with indulgence, offering a method of preservation that also enhances flavour. The layer of fat acts as a natural barrier, keeping the meat fresh while adding richness to every bite. For the Amish, this technique is a perfect example of their resourceful approach to food preservation, as it allows them to create a versatile, ready-to-eat product that doesn't rely on refrigeration. In emergencies or during harsh winters, potted meat provides a convenient and nourishing meal option. The first time I tried making potted meat, I was blown away by how luxurious it felt. There's a certain elegance to opening a jar and spreading the rich, savoury meat on fresh bread. It's a preservation method that doesn't just store food, it creates a little piece of culinary art. To try potted meat at home, start by slow cooking pork with your favourite herbs and spices. Once tender, shred or chop the meat and pack it tightly into sterilised jars. Pour hot rendered fat or clarified butter over the meat, ensuring it's completely covered. Let the jars cool until the fat solidifies, then store them in a cool, dark place. When ready to eat, simply scoop out a portion and enjoy it on bread, crackers, or as part of a larger meal. From hearty potted meats to portable snacks, the Amish know how to make every cut of pork last. Their next method is perfect for those who want something lightweight and long-lasting. Drying. Jerky making. There's something deeply satisfying about making jerky from scratch. I remember my first batch. Watching those thin strips of pork transform into flavourful, chewy snacks felt like a small miracle. Every time I grab a piece, it reminds me of the simplicity and satisfaction of preparing food with my own hands. Drying pork into jerky is one of the simplest and most portable preservation techniques embraced by the Amish. Thin strips of pork are marinated in a blend of salt, vinegar and spices, then either hung on racks or laid out on clean surfaces to dry. This process can take place in the open air, in the sun, or within a controlled smokehouse environment, depending on the family's preference and the season. The key is ensuring low humidity and consistent airflow to properly dehydrate the meat. Once fully dried, the pork jerky is stored in cloth bags or sealed containers, ready to provide a protein-packed snack whenever needed. Making pork jerky at home is easier than you might think. Start by slicing the pork into thin, uniform strips. This ensures even drying. Marinate the strips in a mixture of salt, vinegar, and your preferred seasonings for several hours or overnight. Lay the pork strips out on racks in a dehydrator, oven, or even in the open air if conditions are dry and warm. Set your oven or dehydrator to a low temperature, around 140 degrees Celsius, and let the pork dry until it's firm but pliable. Store the jerky in airtight containers or vacuum-sealed bags to keep it fresh for months. Drying transforms pork into a lightweight, long-lasting food source that doesn't require refrigeration. Perfect for emergencies, travel, or daily convenience. For the Amish, jerky serves as both a practical preservation method and a way to maximize the use of every cut of meat. The method is especially valuable in off-grid living scenarios, as it's entirely self-sufficient and can be done with minimal tools. Plus, pork jerky retains much of its flavour and nutrients, making it a satisfying and energy-rich food option. Jerky is a favourite for good reason, but sometimes you need a solution that's a little more grounded, literally. Let's see how the Amish use the earth itself to keep their pork fresh. Cold storage in root cellars. Root cellars are a cornerstone of Amish food preservation, offering a cool, stable environment to store pork and other perishables. The Amish prepare their root cellars by digging into the earth, where natural insulation keeps temperatures consistent, typically between 35 degrees and 40 degrees. Pork cuts, often wrapped in cloth or packed in sawdust, are carefully arranged on wooden shelves or hung from hooks to maximize airflow. The cool, humid conditions prevent the meat from drying out, while inhibiting bacterial growth, making root cellars an effective solution for short to medium-term preservation. It's a straightforward yet ingenious way the Amish utilize natural resources to store food safely without relying on electricity. There's a certain charm to stepping into a root cellar. It's like entering a time capsule of food preservation. I remember visiting a family friend's homestead as a child and marvelling at the rows of stored meats and produce. It felt like discovering treasure underground. Creating your own cold storage space not only preserves food, but also connects you to these timeless traditions. Cold storage in root cellars is a perfect example of low-tech ingenuity that aligns with the Amish commitment to sustainability. This method not only preserves pork, but also extends the lifespan of other foods like fruits and vegetables, creating a holistic system for long-term food security. In emergencies, when power outages render freezers useless, a well-maintained root cellar can mean the difference between wasted food and a well-stocked pantry. For the Amish, root cellars symbolize self-reliance and the ability to live harmoniously with nature. You don't need to dig a massive pit to create your own cold storage solution. If you have a basement or garage, designate a cool, dark corner with good ventilation to mimic root cellar conditions. Store pork cuts in food-safe containers using sawdust or straw as insulation if needed. For those ready to take on a bigger project, digging a small root cellar in your backyard is more feasible than you might think. Just ensure the location has proper drainage to avoid moisture buildup. Keep the space clean and organized, and you'll have a natural cold storage solution perfect for preserving pork and more. Root cellars provide natural refrigeration, but the Amish also have a way to make their pork storage even more versatile, by turning fat into something magical. Preserving pork and fat together. Rendering pork into lard is a timeless preservation method that the Amish use to store both fat and meat for long periods. The process involves gently heating pork fat, often trimmed from bacon or roasts until it melts and separates from any solid impurities. This liquid lard is then strained and poured into sterilised jars or containers while still hot, creating a clean, shelf-stable product. In some cases, small pieces of cooked pork are also submerged in the rendered lard, using it as a barrier to protect the meat from spoilage. This dual-purpose approach ensures that no part of the pork is wasted while providing two essential resources: flavourful fat for cooking and preserved meat. Rendering lard embodies the Amish commitment to sustainability and resourcefulness. It produces a versatile cooking fat while also serving as a foundation for other preservation methods. In off-grid or emergency situations, rendered lard is an invaluable tool, as it doesn't require refrigeration. The combination of flavour, utility and long-term storage makes this a cornerstone of Amish food preservation traditions. To render lard at home, start with clean, trimmed pork fat. Cut it into small pieces and place it in a heavy pot or slow cooker. Heat gently over low heat, stirring occasionally until the fat liquefies and the solid bits, cracklings, separate. Strain the liquid through a fine mesh or cheesecloth into sterilised jars, leaving a small gap at the top for expansion. Seal the jars tightly and let them cool before storing in a cool, dark place. For additional preservation, cooked pork pieces can be submerged in the hot lard before sealing the jars. This creates an airtight seal that keeps the meat fresh for months. The aroma of lard rendering on the stove always takes me back to cosy afternoons spent experimenting in the kitchen. The first time I rendered lard, I was amazed by how it transformed simple pork fat into a creamy, versatile ingredient that could elevate everything from biscuits to roasted vegetables. Rendering lard gives you a valuable cooking resource, but the Amish don't stop there. They take this technique a step further, using lard not just to cook, but to seal. Lard sealing, confit method. It's easy to confuse rendering lard with lard sealing, but these two methods serve different purposes. Rendering focuses on producing the lard itself, which is a versatile ingredient for cooking and baking. Lard sealing, on the other hand, uses the rendered fat as a medium to preserve cooked pork by creating an airtight seal. Together, they represent a complete cycle of resourceful preservation. Once the lard is rendered, the Amish take it a step further by using it to seal cooked pork in an airtight layer. Known as lard sealing or the confit method, this involves packing tender, slow-cooked pork pieces into jars or crocks, then pouring hot liquid lard over them until they're fully submerged. As the lard cools and solidifies, it forms a protective barrier that locks out air and bacteria, ensuring the pork remains fresh for months. This method is especially popular for preserving smaller cuts like sausages or pork shoulder, as it not only keeps the meat safe, but also enhances its flavour over time. To try lard sealing at home, begin by cooking pork through slow roasting or braising until tender. Once the meat is ready, pack it tightly into sterilised jars or crocks. Heat the rendered lard until it's fully liquefied and pour it over the pork, ensuring no air bubbles remain. Allow the jars to cool until the lard solidifies, then store them in a cool, dark space, like a pantry or basement. When you're ready to eat, scoop out the meat and gently heat it. Don't forget to use the leftover lard for frying or sautéing other dishes. Lard sealing offers a unique combination of practicality and culinary appeal. By encasing the meat in its own fat, this method preserves tenderness and adds richness to every bite. It's a perfect example of waste-free living, as the rendered lard is later reused for cooking. For the Amish, this method provides a dependable way to store meat during the winter months or in times when refrigeration isn't available. Sealing pork in lard is brilliant, but what if you want something even more shelf-stable? The Amish have mastered a method that locks in freshness for years. let's talk about canning. Canning pork. Canning is a trusted preservation technique among the Amish, ensuring pork stays fresh and safe for months or even years. The process begins with cooking or browning pork pieces, which are then packed into sterilised glass jars. A saltwater solution or broth is poured over the meat to enhance flavour and preservation. The jars are sealed and placed in a pressure canner, which uses high heat and pressure to eliminate bacteria and create a vacuum seal. Once cooled, the canned pork can be stored on shelves in root cellars or pantries, ready to use in soups, stews, or standalone dishes. Canning provides a secure, reliable way to preserve pork that requires no refrigeration and minimal storage space. For the Amish, this method is a practical solution for long-term food security, particularly during harsh winters or in case of crop shortages. The vacuum-sealed jars also lock in flavour and nutrients, ensuring the meat is as delicious as it is shelf-stable. In modern times, canning is a versatile preservation method for anyone looking to reduce food waste or prepare for emergencies. Canning always feels like preparing for the future. I remember the first time I opened a jar of pork I had canned myself. It was incredibly satisfying to know I'd preserved a delicious, ready-to-use meal with my own hands. It's a preservation method that brings both convenience and a sense of accomplishment. To can pork at home, begin by preparing the meat. Cut it into chunks and cook it lightly, seasoning as desired. Pack the pork into sterilised jars, leaving about an inch of headspace. Add boiling broth or salted water to cover the meat, then secure the lids. Place the jars in a pressure canner, ensuring the water level and canner settings match the manufacturer's guidelines. Process the jars for the recommended time, usually 75 to 90 minutes for pork. Then let them cool completely before checking the seals. Properly canned pork can last for up to a year when stored in a cool, dark place. Canning is a dependable option, but there's another approach that combines tradition with innovation. Let's see how vacuum sealing keeps things fresh without the need for refrigeration. Vacuum sealing with oxygen absorbers. While the Amish primarily rely on traditional methods, some communities have adopted vacuum sealing with oxygen absorbers for preserving pork. This method involves storing dried or cured pork in vacuum-sealed bags or jars, with oxygen absorber packets added to remove any remaining air. By eliminating oxygen, the process significantly slows spoilage and extends the shelf life of the pork. This technique is particularly useful for storing dried meats such as jerky or small cured cuts, and is often combined with older methods like salt curing or drying. Vacuum sealing marries simplicity with modern efficiency, creating an airtight environment that protects pork from spoilage. For the Amish, this method offers a way to enhance traditional techniques while staying true to their values of sustainability and practicality. It's especially beneficial in emergency preparedness, as vacuum-sealed pork can remain safe and flavourful for months or even years. To vacuum seal pork at home, you'll need a vacuum sealer and oxygen absorber packets, both of which are readily available online or in stores. Start by curing or drying the pork to reduce its moisture content. Place the meat in a vacuum sealable bag or jar, add an oxygen absorber, and use the sealer to remove air completely. Store the sealed packages in a cool, dark place. For those without a vacuum sealer, manual sealing methods with oxygen absorbers can also work effectively, though they may require more effort. Using a vacuum sealer feels like blending old-world wisdom with modern tools. I love how it complements traditional preservation methods, adding an extra layer of security. The first time I sealed dried pork this way, it felt like I was safeguarding a treasure, and opening the package months later proved it was well worth the effort. Vacuum sealing is efficient, but the Amish also have ways to preserve pork using natural, everyday materials like sawdust or bran. Layering in sawdust or bran. Layering pork in sawdust or bran might sound unconventional, but it's surprisingly effective. The first time I tried it, I felt like I was tapping into a secret that had been hidden in plain sight. It's a preservation method that feels as resourceful as it is timeless. Layering pork in sawdust or bran is another ingenious Amish preservation method. Once the pork has been cured or smoked, it is placed in large containers or wooden crates, surrounded by layers of fine sawdust or wheat bran. The sawdust or bran acts as a protective cushion, keeping the pork dry while preventing exposure to air and pests. The Amish often use sawdust from untreated hardwoods or bran left over from grain milling, ensuring the materials are clean and natural. This method works particularly well for hams or other larger cuts of pork that need to be stored for extended periods. Both sawdust and bran are often byproducts of other processes, turning what might otherwise go to waste into valuable preservation tools. The method requires no electricity and is highly adaptable, making it an excellent choice for emergency preparedness or sustainable living. To replicate this method at home, begin by curing or smoking the pork. Find clean, untreated hardwood sawdust or food-grade bran, and layer it in a food-safe container. Place the pork in the container, covering it completely with additional layers of sawdust or bran. Store the container in a dry, cool area, and when you're ready to use the pork, simply brush off the sawdust or bran and prepare the meat as needed. Layering pork in sawdust or bran is resourceful, but for something truly transformative, the Amish turn to fermentation. Fermentation, salami and sausages. Fermenting pork into salami or sausages is another creative and traditional method the Amish use to preserve meat while adding depth of flavour. This process involves grinding pork, mixing it with salt, spices, and sometimes starter cultures, and stuffing the mixture into natural casings. The sausages are then hung in a cool, humid environment, such as a specially designed curing room or cellar, to ferment over weeks or months. During this time, beneficial bacteria thrive, creating an acidic environment that preserves the meat while developing its signature tangy flavour. For the Amish, fermenting pork is not only a way to ensure long-term storage, but also a culinary tradition, with recipes often passed down for generations. Fermentation serves a dual purpose: preservation and flavour enhancement. The natural bacteria involved in the process create a hostile environment for harmful microbes, ensuring the safety and longevity of the pork. This method aligns perfectly with the Amish values of resourcefulness and sustainability, requiring no electricity or refrigeration. It also provides a portable, nutrient-dense food source, ideal for long winters or hard times. In a world increasingly dependent on processed foods, fermented meats offer a healthy, homemade alternative that celebrates natural preservation. Fermenting meat at home may sound daunting, but it's achievable with a little preparation. Begin by grinding fresh pork and mixing it with curing salt, your preferred spices, and a starter culture, available online or at specialty stores. Stuff the mixture into natural sausage casings, tie them off, and hang the sausages in a controlled environment at around 55 degrees with 70% humidity. If you don't have a curing room, a wine fridge or converted closet can work as a makeshift curing space. Allow the sausages to ferment for several weeks, checking regularly for proper drying. Once fermented, the sausages are ready to eat and can be stored in a cool place for months. The first time I tasted homemade salami, I couldn't believe how much better it was than store-bought. It wasn't just the flavour, it was the pride of knowing it had been made by hand, following a process rooted in tradition. Fermenting pork feels like alchemy, transforming simple ingredients into something extraordinary. It's a method that not only preserves meat, but also preserves the joy of creating something truly special. Fermented meats like salami are packed with flavour, but sometimes the simplest methods are the most effective. Pickling in brine. Pickling in brine. Pickling pork in brine is a centuries-old preservation method that remains a staple in Amish communities. This technique involves submerging cuts of pork in a salt water solution infused with herbs and spices. The brine acts as a barrier, preventing harmful bacteria while allowing the meat to absorb rich flavours. The Amish often prepare their brine with precise proportions of salt, sugar and water, adjusting the mix to suit family recipes or specific cuts of meat. The pork is packed into large, food-safe containers, often ceramic crocks or barrels, and kept in cool, dark cellars to ensure consistent preservation. Over time, the pork becomes tender and flavourful, making it a versatile addition to meals long after it's preserved. To brine pork at home, start by preparing a brine solution. Dissolve 1 cup of salt and 1-2 cup of sugar per gallon of water, adjusting quantities based on the volume needed. Add spices like bay leaves, black peppercorns or garlic to elevate the flavour. Submerge the pork completely in the brine, using a weight to keep it below the surface if necessary. Store the container in a cool place, like a refrigerator or a cold basement, for 1-2 weeks. Check the pork regularly to ensure the brine stays fresh and the meat remains fully submerged. Once pickled, the pork can be cooked directly or smoked for additional preservation and flavour. Brining is both an art and a necessity for the Amish, offering a reliable way to preserve pork for months. The method is incredibly adaptable, working for a variety of cuts, from ham to bacon. Beyond its practicality, brining exemplifies the Amish approach to sustainable living, as it requires minimal equipment and no reliance on electricity. In modern times, this method offers a resilient solution for food preservation during extended power outages or for those seeking to reduce dependency on refrigeration. Moreover, the combination of salt and natural flavourings enhances the taste of the pork, making it as enjoyable to eat as it is practical to store. There's a comforting ritual to preparing brine and watching it transform raw pork into something hearty and flavourful. I've tried it at home, and the process reminded me of family holidays when my grandmother would make brined ham. Each slice tasted like love and tradition combined. It's a method that connects you to the past while solving a very modern problem: how to preserve food naturally. And last but not least, dry curing. Dry curing is one of the simplest and oldest methods for preserving pork, and the Amish have mastered this technique over centuries. Unlike wet brining or smoking, dry curing uses a blend of salt, sugar and spices to coat the pork thoroughly. The meat is rubbed down generously, ensuring every surface is packed with the curing mixture. After this initial step, it is stored in a cool, dry area, such as a root cellar or an insulated shed, away from moisture and pests. Over time, the salt draws out moisture from the meat, creating an environment hostile to bacteria. The Amish often add personal touches to the curing process, like incorporating cloves, black pepper, or even dried herbs, depending on family traditions. The end result is a deeply flavoured, long-lasting pork product that can be eaten directly or cooked further. Dry curing at home is straightforward and accessible, even for beginners. Start with fresh cuts of pork, such as a ham or belly, and prepare a cure mix using salt, sugar, and your favourite spices. Coat the meat liberally, rubbing the mixture into every crevice. Place the pork on a rack or in a shallow pan, and keep it in a cool, dry space. Your refrigerator works fine if a root cellar isn't available. Check the pork every few days to ensure the cure is evenly distributed, and let it rest for 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the thickness of the cut. Once cured, The pork can be stored wrapped in paper or cloth in a cool, low-humidity environment. The result is a deliciously preserved meat that's perfect for emergencies or gourmet home cooking. The art of dry curing is surprisingly meditative. I remember the first time I tried it, sprinkling salt and spices onto a fresh ham, and wondering if it would turn out. Weeks later, cutting into the cured meat felt like unearthing treasure. It was delicious. But more than that, it felt like a nod to simpler, more self-sufficient times. For the Amish, dry curing is more than a preservation method. It's a way to honour resourcefulness and tradition. This technique doesn't require specialised equipment or electricity, making it ideal for self-reliant living. In emergencies or extended power outages, dry-cured pork provides an invaluable protein source that remains safe to eat for months. Beyond its practicality, the method also creates rich, nuanced flavours that are difficult to replicate with modern refrigeration. This process exemplifies the Amish philosophy of working with nature to meet their needs while embracing simplicity.